Time is a filter of ideas and stories. When we think back at the films we liked, we forget about the thousands of films that were released so many years ago. It's a type of amnesia that we have, to take the greatest hits of the decade and think that those were the only films that existed. Independent films are not just the art house fare, but the low-budget action film, for instance, can tell us about our past and remind us of the things that we've forgotten. As I'm building my next documentary, I'm taking a look at the 1991 martial arts action film Tiger Claws, starring Cynthia Rothrock, Jalal Merhi, and Bolo Yeung. The question this week is, does this film matter?
Tiger Claws. For those few masters, it's a skill of combat. For one man, it's a weapon of murder.
This killer is a highly trained martial artist.
He did that with a sword?
No, his hand. It's Tiger Claws.
The city is being torn apart.
There must be 10,000 martial artists in New York alone.
And only two cops can stop the frenzy.
I want you two working together.
Hey, I'm the one that's supposed to be calling the shots.
It is a mystery
I'm looking for a master that teaches Tiger.
that will lead to a forbidden world.
Defend yourself.
Tiger Claws. Jalal Merhi of Black Pearls. Cynthia Rothrock of No Retreat, No Surrender. And Bolo Yeung of Double Impact and Bloodsport. Tiger Claws.
So hey everyone, welcome to the VHS Massacre Project Lab. This is a show which initially kind of does a sort of pre-production for my next documentary. And the next documentary is about a catalog of films called North American Pictures. And it contains a number of horror films and sci-fi films, but also some really cool action flicks. So I'm here with producer and composer Tim Kulig. How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and so I think we wanted to just talk about the film on two different levels in regard to it as an individual film, but then also from the broader perspective of like what did these action films from the late 80s and early 90s actually do? How do they affect society? You know, in some sense, I think they're sort of windows into the time period. I thought this was a pretty good window into the martial arts scene of the late 80s and early 90s.
Yeah, it's akin to right, all the Karate Kid movies are that era, right? Best of the Best. Yeah, so thinking those, that whole genre.
Yeah, so just to refamiliarize, we're talking about the 1991 action film called Tiger Claws, starring Cynthia Rothrock, Jalal Merhi, and of course Bolo Yeung, the Chinese Hercules himself. But yeah, so you were saying.
Yeah, I think it captured a lot of the visual standards of the time period, right? You look at some of the, I mean, it's 30 years old now, right? I mean, it released 1991, which is crazy. I mean, it makes me feel incredibly old. But I look at Cynthia Rothrock, who's clearly at her Cynthia Rothrockest, you know, in this movie. She's svelte, she's kicking butt, very woman empowerment. I mean, that's really in the kind of in the zeitgeist of movie making and even Disney films nowadays, right? The last several years, that's been a big thing.
I was actually thinking about this concept of, we do seem to be a culture that has amnesia, you know. Everyone's really pushing diversity very hard. And I think that one of the things is when they're looking at diversity in film and TV, the average person is not looking back that far, and they're not looking into anything but the mainstream. Right. So if you're looking at the top 100 films of 1991, yeah, it's not going to have that much diversity. But in essentially the direct-to-video genre, the B-movie genre, there's a shitload. I mean, first of all, Cynthia Rothrock starring, Jalal Merhi's Brazilian. You have Bolo Yeung, who's, Chinese, So, we just watched TC2000. That's Billy Blanks and, a bunch of other people. So what you realize is that direct-to-video and independent and B movies had a shitload more diversity because like someone like Bolo Yeung you might be able to cast, even though he was in like Double Impact and Bloodsport and right. and Enter the Dragon. I mean, he's like a legend, but it was like in the direct to video, it's like, oh, maybe we can get Bolo Yeung. He plays a lot of villains. Maybe we can get him. So I thought that was interesting too.
I found the imagery. Wow, 30 years does a lot for filmmaking. It really does. There's a whole different perspective on pacing, on the shots. Like I think you and I talked briefly before we started talking on the podcast about specifically like some slowness in the beginning, like the first 15, 20. It took some time to get going. It's almost like that old adage about writing a book, like, the first chapter you throw away because, you're just kind of getting going. Right. You're getting the storyline moving. And what did surprise me about this movie is that outside of the montages, which I'll let you take the lead on that, but outside of the montages for the movie, I found that a lot of the shots, they were atypical, but they weren't, I didn't feel like there was anything going on that was over the top, like say, what you'll call it, Samurai Cop. You know what I mean? Like where just there was obviously gratuitous fighting scenes, but I really felt they were really well choreographed, and somewhat believable street fights, not these crazy things where people are on like pulleys and like, jumping up walls and stuff like that. I mean, I loved her over the head kicks. Those are believable. And then the Sonya move that she did. Oh, that was totally cool.
Yeah. So we should get into this. So this film came out a year before the Mortal Kombat game came out. And Cynthia Rothrock is a legend in her own right. She's a 5-time world champion, undefeated weapons expert. And she competed at a time when there was no women's league, so she beat out all the men and all the women. So this
That's
is
incredible.
like, yeah, she's truly incredible martial artist, inducted into the Martial Arts Hall of Fame, and in China fought with Sammo Hung and Michelle Yeoh and all these legendary martial artists. So. She's the real deal, and she did these films for North American Pictures in Canada, I believe, because I think that's where that company was out of, was Canada. She really knows what she's doing. She's similar to Chuck Norris in that Chuck Norris came out of, although he was more into fighting and less weapons demonstrations, but he was like a world champion who then got into movies, and Cynthia Rothrock was the same thing. She was a martial artist who then got into movies.
Right.
And so you can tell, when you're talking about the fight scenes, like she's awesome in them. And the other guy, Jalal Merhi, also gifted martial artist as well. It just makes a huge difference. And I think that's what I get from these films. Like, they were trying to make exciting action sequences. And I remember growing up, and all you needed is if you watched a movie and there was a few crazy kicks in it, that's kind of all you needed. You go out in the backyard and then you try to do the kicks, and like, expectations were just not, like, we didn't need that much growing up. You know what I mean?
Right. I mean, listen, this is pre, you know, mainstream CGI like we see now, and people just had to kind of do their thing, and people had to use camera angles and jump cuts and stuff to make it believable, or speed up the film slightly, right? I mean, that's a standard too with a lot of these martial arts films from the 80s, right? They would speed it up a bit and create that extra energy. You're more technical about that than I am, but I imagine that's the case. And whenever I watch it, I'm like, that seems faster than human. So,
before I forget, I mentioned, because you mentioned the Sonya Blade kick that she does, right. And I mentioned Mortal Kombat, and there's a very good reason why I mentioned that, and that is because when they were creating Mortal Kombat, the character of Sonya Blade is based upon Cynthia Rothrock. And the basically developers said that. So and this is to sort of demonstrate how big of a deal she was. Johnny Cage was obviously Jean-Claude Van Damme, mm-hmm. and Cynthia Rothrock was Sonya Blade, and then I think was it Kung Lao was Bruce Lee. So obviously,
right.
So they basically took her kick. You can see it Tiger Claws. It's she puts both legs over the head and pulls the guy over. So they were influenced by Cynthia Rothrock, and then from what I understand, and I have to watch Tiger Claws 2 and 3, but those turn into more fantastical, where people are throwing like fireballs and stuff with their hands, and
more mysticism, that kind of thing.
Yeah, more mysticism in it, and it ends up being kind of parodies of Mortal Kombat, which is ironic because Mortal Kombat is that character's based upon her. So it ends up being a lot of give and take, but I found that really fascinating,
I think if they had fast forwarded, say, 15, 20 years, and we were in the era of, social media, and, even as far back as like MySpace and like just getting into Facebook, it may have been a different thing for knowing who she is. You know what I mean? Like if there was more, in your face understanding of this personality, and finding out that she actually was the inspiration for a video game character that's iconic, I feel like more people would know about her.
Yeah, she's got like serious street cred, but it's definitely like, the average person would know who Jackie Chan is, but they might not know who Sammo Hung is, who's mm-hmm. his sidekick, who was heavier guy, but could do just as crazy stuff,
Right.
And I think Cynthia Rothrock's like that. The other thing too is I believe that Tarantino, his Kill Bill series, obviously Uma Thurman is wearing literally Bruce Lee's outfit from Game of Death, but I think it's undeniable that Uma Thurman is partially like influenced by her character, is influenced by Cynthia Rothrock.
Yeah.
Given that Tarantino, I know goddamn well he's seen all her films, you know what I mean? Like, there's just no way. But yeah, so that is an interesting thing, like this give and take between B movies and these mainstream movies. But the bizarre thing is, the only information I could find on Tiger Claws in regard to the budget is Jalal, who's Cynthia's like partner in the film. So he's also the producer, and he put in apparently $2.5 million into this film. And to be honest, that was a lot of damn money. And I when I saw the film, it's not that the film was made far better than I thought it was going to be, especially by the end. You realize that this really production value, it's not that much different than like a Seagal movie or a Van Damme movie in their prime, It's not that different from Double Impact or something like that, or Lionheart. So I get it, but I definitely, when I heard this was a $2.5 million film, I thought to myself, I can see $1 million, but 2.5 felt like a lot of money. But I mean, maybe they just had to pay the talent that much, you know?
Yeah, I mean, also, did they make it back?
Yeah. And there's not a lot of information on that. Like Wikipedia doesn't have the box office or anything. Because, you know, these films, I would assume, were released in the theater as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no box office information. But
They're not like a whatchamacallit, Charles Band direct-to-video group, right? Like that's not how they had a mainstream release.
They had theatrical because they had produced films that had like Christopher Walken and Dolph Lundgren, but Dolph Lundgren coming off of like some of the like some of his higher profile stuff. So like, you know, these guys, Glickenhaus and Shapiro, who were running North American Pictures, they got out of the film industry partially because it did become too expensive to pay some of these people.
Yeah.
So if they're paying like Christopher Walken like a certain amount of money, that it just, the finances didn't really add up at a certain point.
Well, I mean that's evidenced in the 90s. I mean, when we were, you know, really getting focused on and interested in film, you know, you start seeing actors and actresses earning, you know, $7, $10, $15 million a film. I mean, now you're talking, you know, some people earn in excess of $20, $30 million a film. And it's like, how can you justify that when there's an entire other staff and there's a profit margin that you're hoping for? I mean, effects budget and everything else. I mean, $200 million, laying out $250 million practically on something, you know, like
that's going to be hard to do. I mean, now the major streaming sites have such a deep subscriber base that they can get away with that sort of thing on a few projects, but who knows what's going to happen? I mean, there's a lot of evidence to suggest a lot of the Marvel movies are just starting to bomb, you know, so.
What's really good, back to this era, what's really good about it is that, you know, for even like, you know, even for 60 to 100 grand, if you had some, you know, B or tertiary actors and actresses and, you know, a decent story and, you know, a good crew, you could put together a great film. I mean, it's not going to be, you know, rock'em sock'em, you know, Hollywood-esque, but it's going to be a good story. You know what I mean? And the film quality is on par with what you would see coming out of Hollywood. You're just not going to have that extra polished look, right?
But let's say in this time period, the late 80s, early 90s. So Tiger Claws, you know, obviously was shot on 35. It looked really good. We're seeing, like, I have a feeling if Troma, who acquired the film, could ever get a good transfer, this thing will look pretty good.
You think it would clean up from?
Yeah. If they can get the original negative, and I bet there is a print or a negative of it, they can, you know, real film, motion picture film has a resolution they say of somewhere between 2.5 and 4K. I mean, it's essentially silver deposits, you know.
Right.
So it's more like organic than defined pixel resolution, but
these films that we're watching, like I streamed this particular one on Amazon Prime. Is that a capture of a VHS tape?
I don't think it's a capture of a VHS, but it certainly was a standard quality. Yeah, if it was VHS, it would look like total dog shit. But I think it does. It looks like it's some kind of, you know, maybe beta SP tape, standard definition.
Okay.
You know, so if they can go back to that film print and scan it, it'll look gorgeous, and it'll retain a lot of the quality. Because they've even done that. The guy who runs Cinema Epoch, he rescanned Samurai Cop, and Samurai Cop looked way better. Like you're amazed at the resolution they could pull out of it, you know.
Well, I often wondered how that happened. Like, and I know this is a technical thing that's kind of coming slightly off topic, but just out of my curiosity, you know, when you go back in time and you look at some of these movies, you know, they were originally released on VHS, obviously.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then future versions were released to DVD, maybe not even, Blu-ray, because the quality wasn't there. Right.
If you knew a film was going direct to video, you would still shoot it on 16 or 35 to retain that cinematic quality and to make it a product that someone would actually buy, because at that time, late 80s, early 90s, the video looks purely electronic, like news. 30 frames a second. There's no in between. So you had to shoot on film to be taken seriously. And
right.
So, but in order to save costs, they'd have it typically, let's say, transferred onto Beta SP tape, something like that, which was like a broadcast standard. Mm-hmm. And then they would edit purely on tape, and they'd make a tape master. And at the time, it was high quality standard definition, but you lose an incredible amount of data because it's a standard definition electronic format versus actual motion picture film,
Right. And now with the phones that we have today, I mean, God, there's 4K cameras on the back of those, right?
Oh, yeah. They would look. Yeah, I mean, you're still not getting the quality of lenses and things like that. But I guess the point is, though, some of those films were never actually the films were never actually the negatives were never actually cut. So it doesn't actually, a few canisters of film with the finished product on it doesn't exist. So they, unless someone could dig up the negative somewhere, redevelop the whole thing and put the whole film back together, a lot of these direct-to-video films just never had the only master is probably like a Beta SP,
Wow.
So
that's incredible.
I would say with some of these Glickenhaus films, I think because so many of them screened at least some kind of limited screening, they probably do have prints of all of these. And if they have prints of all of them, then we're going to see, if Troma could get their hands on them, we're going to see much nicer looking transfers.
Yeah. Back to the film. I kept expecting there to be some gratuitousness to it. I mean, 80s and 90s films were typical of, okay, you're going to do an action film. There'll likely be a sex scene. There'll be some nudity. There'll be a character development with the two main characters. Blah, blah. They kind of left that out. They kind of focused on what they wanted to focus on, which was the fighting and the style, and that is like the forbidden style, and they had a little bit of a something at the end, which clearly they connected in some kind of relationship form, but like they didn't focus on that, which I kind of liked, because that's kind of the go-to in some of these. Like they get into these like really hot and heavy, action sequences where their lives are at risk and whatever, and it defaults into this atypical of like, well, it's going to turn sexual for us because that tension exists because we were at the verge of death. You know what I mean? And it's just so typical. It's like I was kind of pleased to see that they de-emphasized that in this movie. I was like, oh, okay, cool.
Well, yeah, I like that too. Yeah, I mean the movie is like it's the directing is totally solid. It supports the visuals. Like, you can see they set up a dolly in some shots. The movements are good. Like they're using good lenses. Like, it's done on a much higher level than I expected. And the fact that there's 3 of them is really fascinating too. I don't remember seeing these films in the video store. Not these ones.
Neither do I.
And that's a wonderful thing too. Is like, they shot what looks to be all in real locations. It doesn't look like they built any sets. I mean, they shoot in a movie theater, they shoot in a bar, they shoot on a boat, they shoot in what looks to be some kind of police office building type thing.
Right.
And it was just done. They definitely hit upon the Asian mysticism, right? Because Bolo Yeung, the villain, has this deadly claw technique he uses. They kind of push it to a
Almost hammy. Yeah.
hammy, like a mild superpower, you know, like he's
The tiger roar, like when he starts attacking, right? Like it's borderline camp. You know what I mean?
It's almost supervillain, right? It's like but I also like the thing that there's a few, you could say, nuances in there where you see Bolo Yeung pop up, you kind of know he's the villain, and then later you see him like in the background of a shot, and he's like in this dojo, and he's like painting a mural, and he looks kind of nerdy, and I thought that was really interesting too, like
unassuming,
very unassuming, and as a plot device, it's kind of cool. I mean, the plot is basically someone is on a murdering spree, killing martial arts masters.
Yeah.
And these two cops have to delve into that world. And when you think about it, that's pretty badass, you know? It's a cool idea, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. They don't really delve into, you know, necessarily why he chose his victims. They all seemed like, well, at least towards the end when you realize it's him and they stop hiding who's doing it and it's him doing it. It just seems like it's all spur of the moment, you know, spontaneously, you know, I'm just going to lose my shit and start killing people. You know what I mean? Like come across something, they discovered him, you know, and like there's a scene towards the end of the movie where they realize he killed the dojo master there, and 3 of the people come out and he takes them all out too. And it's all, you know, doing all this stuff. Now there's 4 people there and he's just like, kind of just like growling to himself and sitting at his, like laughing. And it's like, okay, clearly you're homicidal maniac. You know what I mean? That's been hiding behind this persona of this, you know, mural painter.
Yeah. You know what the interesting thing is? I do think it would have been nice to hear some motivation from that character. Either the cops finding out his motive or him discussing more clearly his motive. I mean, obviously, you know, he was taking trophies. I know that. He'd kill a master and he'd take a trophy, and he had his shrine.
Right.
And the shrine had the trophies on him, and he would do kata in front of the shrine.
In the clothing closet, by the way, behind the clothes, in some giant additional room filled with 1,000 candles that nobody seemed to smell, which to me was just brilliant.
On a nightly basis, it's just all back there.
Where'd he go? Nobody knows.
No one knows. He's painting back there. Leave him alone. But yeah, I could have used some exposition just about, you know, what his motive was. I mean, you know, you presume he just wanted to be the top and kill all competition, you know. But it would have been nice to hear it from that character, you know.
Yeah, because the other movies like No Retreat, No Surrender from that era, you know, similar style movie, right? You know, similar level of acting, you know, early stages for Van Damme, right? Clear premise, like who's the better dojo, who's the best, you know, who's the best student, who's the best master, that kind of thing. And that all piggybacks off of the Saturday afternoon, you know, dubbed movies we saw as kids, right? I mean, literally, like most of the plot lines of those movies are all about like, my style is better than your style, and you know, oh, you disrespected my master, and you know, and there's this back and forth, and then there's this like turf war, and somebody dies, and then there's retribution, you know?
Or like, hoodlums go into a dojo and say, "I want to challenge your master." You know, it's like that's the plot to like so many of these martial arts films. The roster of people in this film and other of these North American Pictures films is there's a lot of overlap because I was watching a Billy Blanks film, and Billy Blanks is in a few Van Damme films, including Lionheart.
Yeah, I recall that. Yeah,
and then Bolo Yeung's obviously in, I think, Double Impact and Bloodsport. It just was a different time period. We're talking about like A-list martial arts stars versus B-list, and it was kind of a blurry era. I mean, like one of Seagal's and Van Damme's earlier films were not big, huge films.
Just basic. They were okay. We've got another up and coming, a rising star here. Let's throw him in a budget of X and see if it sticks. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and these films like played in theaters. This is what it was. I mean, you literally take Tiger Claws could have been playing in the theater, depending on the year it came on, alongside something like King of the Kickboxers or No Retreat, No Surrender, or something like that.
Right.
And yeah, you just realize that, if you were in that time period, you like Van Damme wasn't Van Damme yet, probably in 91, or maybe he was getting there. But the point was, you might not go, like, you go into a movie theater and it's like, it's this one playing, or it's, Bloodsport playing. At the time, these people may have not broken out in the way that you know them now.
Right. I bet you, back to the technology, so No Retreat, No Surrender, and this movie, let's say that they're roughly the same time frame that they were released. I forget how much earlier No Retreat was. You were saying, I don't remember seeing this in the video store. Well, we remember the difference between, the full market value VHS tape versus sell-through, right?
85. So No Retreat was older. Yeah.
The thing about this, you're an independent video store owner. What are you going to do? Are you going to take a chance on a couple copies of a Van Damme movie with a guy that's coming up in the ranks, and spending money on that? And I'm sure that's what happened. You know what I mean? And because it wasn't sell through, and it wasn't in a format like DVD, which, ultimately you're not going to be paying $60 a pop copy. If you're going to pay in 20, 25 tops, you can get 3 of them for the price you would have gotten a VHS for. You're more likely to get like 1 copy of it and take a chance on it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. You're in that video store aisle, the Bloodsport, you already seen Bloodsport. You pick up Tiger Claws, you look on the back, it's the main villain from Bloodsport. Look, I'll rent this. Right. And at that time, it probably worked really well. And we were thirsty for that.
Yeah.
If we were like, oh, fucking Billy Blanks from Lionheart, well, I'm gonna rent this.
Yeah.
You would totally do that. That's literally what we did.
Yeah. The second you saw somebody you liked, whether they're in something that actually bled into another genre slightly, you didn't really care. You know what I mean? You're like, great, I'll check it out. Let's see what he's doing with this, or she's doing with that. I found an interesting tidbit about her. She tries to work in every one of her movies that she's from Scranton, Pennsylvania, and that's legitimately where she grew up. So it sounds like just an anecdote of her character, but it's kind of like a Easter egg / homage to her childhood, which I found kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I know that basically I think she was a teen, and they just saw like she's just super athletic.
Well, started at 13. She started training at 13 years old, which is pretty awesome. And she's like a seventh level black belt in one particular style, which to me is it's just mind-boggling. I 7th degree black belt in Tang Soo Do, and she holds 5 black belts. And she was the first woman to grace the cover of what is it? Some martial arts magazine in 1983. It was the first time they ever put a female on the cover. So you talk about empowerment and everything, like, dude, she was it, you know?
Yeah, and the real deal. I mean, that's the thing, is that, like, most people in entertainment these days seem more like models who can act, unless you just have a look like you're Danny Trejo or something, you know? Right. But even he got his fame because he could actually fight, you know? But I would call Tiger Claws to some degree an exploitation film, because what you're marketing is the action. And so you have people like Cynthia Rothrock or Billy Blanks or this guy Jalal Merhi, and they're acting as functional, but you know they're not Gary Oldman and Meryl Streep. You know their talent is martial arts and they can also act, but it is of the time. I'd say you see this less with even Chuck Norris to some degree. I don't think no one would ever call him a great actor, you know?
I mean, think about like Walker, Texas Ranger is probably some of the better side of his acting, because it was a TV series. There was narrative, you know what I mean? It's a, you know, drama action, right? But truthfully, if you go back to this era, what you're really doing is you're filling in between action sequences a narrative that connects the two, right?
Yeah.
And the narrative is secondary. What you're really doing in these films is, when's the next fight? Like I want to know when the next fight is and why and what's going to lead up to it. And, you know, what they're talking about, you know, the fact that it's not real deep, I could give a shit less, because I want to know who she's going to kick ass next. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That's. This is interesting too. The other film I watched was this one called TC 2000, and it was kind of like a Terminator 2 knockoff. And they shot all in like factories and post-industrial stuff and used some, you know, blue lighting to make it look futuristic. But the thing that was interesting was most of the action was people fighting, and usually only a couple people at a time. And in one sense, you know, shooting an action scene, shooting a fight scene takes forever, and it's not easy, and people get hurt and needs to be choreographed, all that stuff. But that is still cheap. That's still probably the cheapest type of action, because right. You're not blowing up a car or house. In this one, they had a big explosion, I think, in the beginning. Tiger Claws, I think it was a boat or a house blows up or something.
It was a vehicle. The gentleman that was the martial artist that rolled the whole film, he shot the driver twice. The driver hit something that looked just like something empty, and the thing exploded like, I don't know, like just went off underneath it, full of like 400 gallons of gasoline. It was amazing.
Yeah, huge explosion. But you know, that was their big stunt, you know. I mean, and back then, you're doing it for the film, but you're really kind of doing it for the trailer. You know, that's
right.
You're doing it. I mean, that's exploitation. It's like, this is for the movie, but it's for the trailer.
Yeah, and it's like you go to the movie and you're like, oh shit, there's only one explosion, and I saw the trailer. But
like, it's an interesting concept, right? Like, action, fighting is entertaining, but in the grand scheme, less expensive than a lot of other things. And right. So it makes sense why these, like, there was just so many of these action films, because martial arts was super hot. There were McDojos on every corner. I remember I studied martial arts at Tracy Kempo for years, from high school into college.
I dipped my toe in there for a short period of time too.
Oh, did you? Yeah. I mean, so it just, everyone loved it. Everyone was into it, you know.
I got my yellow belt. That's what I got.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. I mean,
it's the first test. You know, I never could do like a roundhouse or anything like what this woman can do. Holy cow. Like, you know, her range of motion and her ability to, you know.
Oh, she could move, man. There's one shot. It's just her. She's standing, and then immediately she's doing.
Like a flying sidekick? Like that kind
Yeah,
of
it's
thing?
like a flying sidekick. Like immediately. It's like she's here, and then she's in the air with her leg tucked under, full extended leg. I'm going to watch Tiger Claw 2, you know.
Okay.
And
I might have to parallel that with you and see where it goes, how mystical it gets.
And I'd be curious to know how much it turns into Mortal Kombat, which is interesting. In regard to how this film fits into the doc, I would say if we can talk to Cynthia Rothrock, if she's up for it, then I'd say these films could work in to the documentary very well.
And I'd love to pick her brain a little bit and just, you know, understand some of her career and just what motivated her, you know, not only to be so successful in her studies, you know, in her martial arts studies, and then to go beyond that and say, well, I want to do 60 films now. And which is what IMDb says. She's done over 60 films. So, I mean, that's no small feat. And she's still relatively young. I mean, 61, 63, I think. She got a lot done in a very short period of time.
She's like truly an athlete, which is interesting because you see, like, she posts stuff on YouTube and Instagram, and she's like scuba diving and doing all this. Some people are just wired like that. They're just athletes, like their whole life, you know. It's really interesting. Hopefully we can put her on the checklist of people to talk to. Absolutely. But also, Jalal Merhi, too, was a producer on a lot of these films that are in the North American Pictures catalog. So that guy, Jalal Merhi, would be amazing to talk to because he, you know, him as the producer, you know, not only bankrolling some of these, but putting them together would be invaluable because he might have, you know, various stories about how these things came to be.
And he clearly had martial arts training and experience as well, right?
Yeah. I mean, he was pretty nasty, man. Yeah, he had some good moves in there too.
An expert martial artist, an accomplished jeweler. Okay, these people are like so well rounded. It's incredible.
Yeah. I'd like to talk to Bolo Yeung too, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know if he's does interviews or whatever. But any final thoughts for you? Or
I think of all the ones you could have picked that I was to watch first and have a discussion and narrative with you, I think this is by far probably one of the best because honestly, I went in with that 80s era expectations of, you know, performance, narrative. And of course, I mean, there were, you know, the sergeant sat on his words a few times and, you know, it's like, that's it. That's the only cut we have. We got to put it in,
right.
You know? and it's like, but you know, what's funny is that back then you didn't really care, you know, and especially because of what I said earlier, which is the narrative was less important than the action. You know, it was filling in. You're like, okay, whatever. They're going to have this blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, who are we going to hit next? You know what I mean? And that's why you kind of just, I don't know, you just kind of discounted it. You don't care. You're just waiting for the next fight. So I guess I give these movies from this era a little bit of a reprieve. And I probably beat up modern films a heck of a lot more because there's an expectation like, look, I can go out and get a 4K camera today and spend what? A couple $1,000s with some lenses, the base camera and everything else, and make a feature film of top high quality. You know what I mean? So, and back then, I mean, you had to come up with many times that just to get the equipment on set.
I mean, you're burning. That's the thing is you're burn, especially in those action scenes, shooting 35. You're burning money. Yeah. Now that I think about it, I get why it was so expensive to some degree. But yeah, I think that, you know, you can't put 2021 expectations onto a 30-year-old film. It doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very good action film for the year that it came out, and it hit the marks that it should have. And that's how they were made, and this was a good version of what that film was. Yeah, it is fascinating, the change in expectations of performances, maybe.
I think if I had title discovered this back in the early 90s, I think I would have followed Cynthia's career closer. And I'm sorry that it took this long to find her, but now that I have, I've got the curiosity of her other work, and we'll probably just keep going and checking out some more of it, because she was clearly very good, and it was enjoyable.
Cool. Yeah, I know she's got some hits like Lady Dragon, and China O'Brien is a famous one. And anyway, so we'll have to look at those. But those are not in the Glickenhaus catalog. So right now I'm going to stick with the North American Pictures catalog. All right. Well, thanks for talking it out with me, Tim. We'll see you next time.
All right, man. Thanks again for having me.